Good evening, Black people and all allies fighting for Black liberation, Black prosperity, and Black joy. No, I am not Charles Blow. I'm Laverne McGee, helping Charles out tonight. Welcome to Prime. We have some heavy and thought-provoking things to talk about tonight. The suspect that claimed to have an explosive device in his truck near the U.S. Capitol surrendered to Capitol Police earlier today after a 5-hour standoff. He's been identified as 49-year-old Floyd Ray Roseberry of Grover, North Carolina. Now, this morning, Roseberry drove onto a sidewalk next to the Library of Congress and told an officer that he had a bomb and showed the officer what appeared to be a detonator. Roseberry had been live streaming videos on his way to the Library of Congress, but Facebook has removed them. While it's been confirmed that he did not possess an actual bomb, his live stream showed that he was driving with a large canister on his lap with what appeared to be a battery-powered device on top of it. So during the live streams, Roseberry requested to speak directly to President Biden while warning him that, quote, "the Southern boys are here and the South is coming for you." You know what that means. Roseberry also claimed that 4 other patriots in 4 different vehicles came to D.C. on the same mission as him.
5 of us are already here. And I'm the little man. I'm the speaker. So if you blow my truck up, man, hey, it's on you, Joe. I'm ready to die for the cause.
Capitol Police say it's too early to rule out his claims that co-conspirators were involved, and they, along with the FBI, will continue to investigate. Now, Congress is currently on recess, but staffers and other workers at the Capitol building were evacuated. Some who were present for the insurrection said the evacuation gave them flashbacks and anxiety. Yes, of course. And staffers' emotional trauma was not the only parallel that was drawn to January 6th. In the past few days, Roseberry's live stream rhetoric and social media posts were also consistent with the insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol. Think about that. He spoke of revolution and support of the Million MAGA March, and he shared strong opinions on illegal immigrants. And of course, with the recent developments in Afghanistan, the threat of potential terrorist attacks arising from the Middle East and that area and are aimed at America, and again, part of the conversation. But America has to fully face the fact that our greatest terror threat is not from a far-off land, but born right here, homegrown. You know what we're talking about, white domestic terrorists. Joining us now to discuss is Director of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, Brian Levin. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for rolling with me while I'm in here for Charles this evening.
Oh, Laverne, my pleasure. I hope to see more of you on the screen.
Well, hopefully it'll be for a more pleasant topic. Listen, we need to talk about this.
Yes.
People are hearing the word terrorism. They immediately think Islam and the Middle East, although Afghanistan is not in the Middle East technically, of course. Many insurrections or bomb threats by white males will take it to change the narrative of who terrorists are. Your thoughts?
Look, I've been saying this for years, and can I shout out, since this is the Black News Channel, and you're talking to a mentee of the Honorable A. Leon Higginbotham, God bless him. We have the Lewis Act coming up. We just signed again on for that. There's so many things going on in the news. But the interesting thing from the white supremacist standpoint is that we have seen a shift exactly of what you said. Bear with me. It's at least a 2-part shift. One is on the hardest edge of white supremacy. Since 2018, they have been the number one perpetrators with respect to fatalities in American extremist homicides. And our data is very consistent with that, found in other places like advocacy groups and even other universities. So that's something. We are, however, and this is something, we're seeing a diversification and a mutation. So what I'm saying is when I testified before the U.S. Senate last week, I talked about this threat being severe. And what I think is so interesting is the blending where we don't know the white supremacy starts and other kinds of grievance and conspiracies begin. Sometimes they're intertwined, sometimes they're adjacent, but it's a much more a la carte, idiosyncratic, symbolic, and it's targeting all level of government, including at the local level. And we're also seeing these more rigidly organized groups that existed before splintering and breaking up, and those fragments are still violent. So we saw, for instance, violence at protests in Southern California last weekend. We're seeing more of these. Really briefly, listen to this. The tying in of hate violence into politics. We're seeing the same kind of invective used. We're seeing increases on the internet of this invective tied to hate crime numbers on the street and even extremist plots. Worst month last decade was November 2016, and it gets even worse. That was the worst month for 14 years, and what was that month? The first anniversary of 9/11. What are we coming up with? We're coming up with the 20th anniversary, exactly. So we're actually going to be increasing our threat advisory, although we really did it on August 1st, and we stated so.
Brian, I need to know. Brian, are we in danger right now? Is America in danger right now?
Yeah, sure, but it could be a week from
now.
From
both, and I'm asking you from both sides, from outside terrorists and from internal terrorists. That's the question here. I know you testified about terrorism. Are we dealing with both of these threats right now?
Yes, but not completely simultaneously. Because right now, the Taliban is really juggling, trying to get, the what about Bob situation done, right? They want the Americans out. They want the NATO allies out. They're, whatever they are, and they're evil and backward and all that, but they're also pragmatists. And they also can play a waiting game. So what I'm saying is that is coming. In other words, it was already an issue with respect to some of the extremism that we were seeing in sub-Saharan Africa and in other parts of the world. But now the fact that before Al-Qaeda had free reign in Afghanistan is not something to ignore. I'm not saying it's going to be a complete repetition of what we saw before, but the way this was done is something that historians are going to debate for some time. We don't have that now, but what I'm saying is we are having multiple threats. We're having a diversification, a democratization of hate. White supremacy and far right certainly is that foundation. But here's the interesting thing. We're seeing a more regionalized, idiosyncratic loners and cells mix where they make their a la carte set of grievances. They often commonly will point to the same set of institutions.
But they all sound the same. But Brian, if you're a minority like me, that all sounds the same to me. Let's talk about the language that Floyd Ray Roseberry used in his videos. It's consistent with those of the insurrectionists and some white nationalist groups. Do you think he could end up being a martyr for some of those people who share those beliefs? Because like I said, you can say it's regional, this and that. At the end of the day, we're just hearing the words, and they sound pretty similar of what's going on here, of how they feel about this country and who this country belongs to.
I don't think they're going to think he's a martyr, but I do think they're going to think that he's a failed attempt and let me try something that will be successful. But I do think it's important, though. This is an important distinction. And that is, within the far-right extremism world, we actually have we also have single issues. We saw the Morris citizens, sovereign citizens in Massachusetts earlier. Very small, by the way. I don't want to do like a Tucker Tonight thing. Very small. Where the aardvark that plays the piano becomes the lead story, right? But the bottom line is we're seeing a fragmentation and a polarization, and different extremists are barring different things. The key thing is there is the highest level of distrust in the communal institutions which held us together, the ones in which the beloved community in the 50s and 60s revolved around. And within that, we are seeing a borrowing and an idiosyncratic mix. So someone who's a Second Amendment activist might not share the same belief of an insurrectionist who believes that having a gun gives them a right to rebellion, but they might have the same set of grievances and perceived enemies, and it doesn't matter because the internet is about symbols and it's really a subculture, a political subculture, than it is a political movement. So what I mean is there's a social and social media aspect to this. This guy live streamed this. Look, we need to regulate the social media companies. That's why, we have no dough. But you know what? I don't care. I've been doing this for over 30 years.
But what about the government? I agree with you on the social media companies. All of these, Facebook and whatever, who allows this stuff to be streamed and whatnot, although I'm sure they can't police it every second of the day in terms of knowing what this guy was going to do or whether he was just threatening or whether he was going to go through it. But what about the government? Where do they stand on protecting American citizens from these extremists, these white supremacists who have been getting away with things that black folks could never get away with?
Yeah, right. Could you imagine, right? Anyway, we won't go there right now. We don't have a lot of time, and it's your show, and thank you for having me. But look, here's the bottom line. I begged Congress years ago to please hold hearings on this. There was a political corruption of the intelligence cycle. What else have we seen? And people are going to get mad at me, but it's nonpartisan. There were warnings in the run-up to January 6th where everybody in my field, everyone who was awake and not hospitalized, understood about the threat of January 6th. I cleared my schedule when they were going to have the certification.
Brian, who did you ask? Who did you tell this to? I want names. Who in Congress?
Well, God bless him, Benny Thompson. And you know what? He delivered. Time Magazine did a column, testified before the California State Senate. But what happened was it wasn't until Benny Thompson, let me tell you, he taught my kid to make Southern tea. He was wonderful. And you know why? Let me tell you, he's data-driven. He loves this country. My father was a Nazi-era POW in Germany, an American soldier. And Benny Thompson grew up in Mississippi during the toughest, most pivotal times for that state. And he gets the threat of white supremacy, but he does it in such a professional way. And you know what? We're trying to replicate that here in California. But bottom line, let me tell you something. We are now having a realignment. And what you're going to see is, there's going to be an increased threat from violent Salafist jihadists who are encouraged by the developments in Afghanistan. Additionally, the fragmentation going on here is spreading quite a bit. And that's what makes it so different, but also elevated.
Okay, are you going to talk to Congress about this? And who are you going to talk to about this? Because you're talking about, terrorism from both sides. You're talking about from outside international terrorism, but we're talking about domestic terrorism. What are you going to do now? Because you said you've known about this for so long. You've been lobbying people about it. You see it happening now in front of your eyes. What are you and your allies going to do about this?
What I think needs to be done is we need to have hearings about these failures. And what I'm saying to you is it's always easy to blame the intelligence community. I think the intelligence community is doing a pretty darn good job. If you've read the Los Angeles Times or Foreign Policy, we're putting this stuff out there. But I think what we need is independence with regard to the collection and analysis of terror data, and it has to be frequently updated. And I'll tell you what we need real quick, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Let's get 36 folks, some academics from some people who've been in theater and others who are analysts, and let's get us together, Chatham House rules, and talk about the things that we're seeing. We have to depoliticize this, and unfortunately, the situation in Afghanistan, and this is not going to make me popular, has made a material change in that realignment I was talking about. And while it may not be immediate, that's something that's going to occur and become significantly elevated over time and become a template. While here in the United States, this adoption of grievance, and what I'm saying to you is it's not just black and white. It involves people who are in the Proud Boys, some of whom are people of color. But they all share a fascistic approach to things, and they accept
Pretty few, Brian. The Proud Boys, there's not a whole lot of people of color in the Proud Boys. I gotta, stop you on that one.
Well, the head of Enrique
I understand what
Tarrio-
you're saying.
Wait, hold on. Enrique Tarrio, who was the head of it, it's now splintered, is a Cuban Afro.
One guy.
So, of course he's one guy. What I'm saying is they trot these folks out. But the bottom line is what I'm saying to you is that the risk is that even if they're not, wearing a Klan robe, they are part of a risk that is much more mainstream. I'm far more worried about the fact that there are 3 million people watching anti-white rage on Tucker Carlson every night because he has influence and he is feeding a narrative that Charles has written about, that blacks steal elections. No, it's stolen from them. That blacks
Brian, we could go on about this for a while, but I appreciate your thoughts. Like I said, this is a much bigger discussion. But I gotta say goodbye to you for tonight, and thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time, and we'll continue. You can continue that with Charles. And a look at what role Vice President Harris played in the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's coming up next on Prime. Stay with us. You're watching BNC.